In this video, we're going to talk about what makes winemakers lose sleep at night, both professional and home winemakers. There's some very, very serious home winemakers out there, and of course us professionals, our livelihood depends on it. So we're going to get into that right now. We're talking about things that can go wrong in winemaking. Some of them are just in the normal process of making wine, and some of them are disastrous. The number 10 worst thing that can happen to a winemaker is over-oaking. Over-oaking happens all the time, and it's not really much of a fear of winemakers, but it can take a world-class wine and make it mediocre to most people, because I myself, a wine that tastes like nothing but oak, it could be the best grape in the world, and if all it tastes like is oak, it's going to be like, I could have done this a lot better, and that's about all I'll think about it. So what is the answer to over-oaking? Over-oaking, very simple solution to avoid that problem, and that is to make part of your batch unoaked. And that way you can always take that part of the batch and add it to the oaked wine and neutralize that over-oaking out completely. A lot of big wineries do this. I do this myself, works really well. Number 9 would be tartrate crystals. This is not actually considered a defect, but however, most people don't like those little crystals in the bottom of their glass. First off, if you get them in your mouth, they're kind of disgusting. It's kind of like a gritty, sandy feeling, which isn't very desirable, but they're only on the very bottom of the bottle. What we do today is there's two different things. Cold stabilizing. Now for a home winemaker, you just take your carboy and you have a refrigerator that you can fit a carboy into. You put it in there for 2 weeks and make sure there's no oxygen in it, of course. Put it in there for 2 weeks. All of your tartrate crystals will fall to the bottom. You can bottle it after that because you should have no problem with tartrate. Now this works, but not all the time. If you change anything, then you could still possibly have tartrate crystals. And believe it or not, it's very hard not to change something after cold stabilization, because there's always something you need to do to a wine right toward the end. And it's things such as adding potassium metabisulfite. You might need to re-oak it a little bit. There's a number of things you need to do. So, tartrate crystals. Cold stabilization, the number 2 way you can avoid that is there's a chemical stabilization process now that you can use if you don't mind adding more chemicals to your wine. I personally do not like doing that. I like to keep my wine as chemical free as possible. Potassium metabisulfite is about the only chemical I put in there, and that's because you basically can't live without it. What do you do if you already have it in your bottle? You kill. What do you do if you already have it in your bottle? There's 2 things you can do. You can drink it, and just be very careful, and you can buy these little pourer filters that you put on the top of the wine bottle. Usually not very much gets out of those pourers. You can do that, or you can rebottle it. And you filter it and rebottle it, and you should be okay. For you home winemakers, in the wintertime, if you get the temperatures down to teens and single digits, you can leave that out for 3-4 days in a carboy, as long as you don't let it get too cold. It is a perfect way to cold stabilize wine. Okay, number 8 is cork taint. Cork taint is as old as winemaking itself. And contrary to what people normally think, cork taint isn't necessarily from corks. Historically, most of the time you got cork taint, it was cork, but now with synthetic corks, if you're getting cork taint, it came from somewhere else. Cork taint can come from anywhere made of organic materials such as wood, cardboard. It can come from stairs, scaffolding, pallets, wooden stir sticks, basically anything made of any kind of wood product can cause cork taint. Well, it is very hard to keep wood out of a winery, but we got to try. There's the other component of cork taint, which is chlorinated cleaners, and chlorinated cleaners are the other component of cork taint. The actual chemical, I got it written down here, the actual chemical is 2,4,6 trichloroanisole, which the trichloral, that is the part where the chlorine mixes with these mold byproducts and it becomes cork taint. And if you've ever tasted cork taint, it kind of smells like a mushroom. And it's kind of funny, but I've drank cork tainted wine with many people, and I'd have to say only about half of the experienced wine drinkers can even detect it. For some reason, I have a very sensitive palate to that. So, cork taint, is there anything you can do about it? Well, you can drink it. To me, I don't like drinking it because it tastes horrible, but a lot of people can't even tell it's in there. It isn't going to hurt you. Number 7 on our list. This would be probably a lot higher priority if it was your winery and you were having problems with it. That is Brettanomyces, also known as Brett, not Brett Favre, but Brettanomyces is, it's actually a spoilage yeast. So Brettanomyces and Saccharomyces. Saccharomyces is a yeast you want to be fermenting your juice, and Brettanomyces is it's everywhere, but it's only in tiny quantities. So you have to give it a very nice environment for it to start growing. Once it starts growing in your winery, you can tell it right away. If there's a little bit of Brettanomyces growing along the top of your wine tank, you're gonna walk by and you're gonna, something smells wrong. It basically smells like a horse blanket, a used horse blanket. If you've ever smelt that, they don't smell good. They smell very musty, dingy, and horrible. Wet dog is another description of Brettanomyces, and Brettanomyces is in no way a good taste. However, with that being said, a lot of French wineries, even famous French wineries, actually allow a certain amount of Brettanomyces to grow in their wine because they consider it adding complexity, whereas I have tasted some of these French wines with Brettanomyces in it, and to me, I would prefer that it's not in there. I just don't like it. Even in small amounts, to me, it just tastes like Brettanomyces. So, Brettanomyces, what can you do to prevent it? You can keep a very clean winery, or a very clean winemaking area. If you smell that smell and you see that stuff growing on the edge of a seal or on the edge of a cork, the best way to do it is don't disturb it before you kill it. You want to get in there with your Everclear alcohol and spray that so it kills all that yeast, and then once everything's dead, then you can take the cork off or take the top of your tank off and clean it up a little more. But yeah, if you take a cork off or the stopper off of a carboy, or you take the lid off of a tank, and you had that Brettanomyces along the seal, all that's going to fall in there, and now you really got a problem, because now you got the Brettanomyces in the wine instead of just on the edge. So got to be really careful with that. We had problems here the first couple of years. We just had it growing in a few places, and now we went to a protocol where we sanitize the seals twice a month. Sanitize them with basically Everclear alcohol, and just spray them seals, and we haven't had a problem since. So Brettanomyces, if you've never had it, feel lucky, because you don't want it. And number 6 is going to be another spoilage factor, which isn't a spoilage yeast, it's a spoilage bacteria, and this is Acetobacter. Acetobacter basically is a bacteria that eats alcohol and converts it to vinegar, which if you've ever tasted it, it's not quite as strong as a wine that's converted directly into vinegar, but it's got that vinegary taste, and It's just not good. We had that once in the winery where, and this is where a lot of times it comes from, is fruit flies carry it on their feet. And so if you got a lot of fruit flies around your carboy or around your wine in any way, and with us it was around the seal, they're sucking up the grape juice or the wine, and they're putting their little feet on there, and they're getting Acetobacter bacteria on your seals, and that Acetobacter can go right through your seal into your wine, and it just keeps on eating alcohol, and it just keeps tasting bad. So what can you do to prevent Acetobacter? You can be very clean, and then when you got a year like this year, we have a lot of problems with fruit flies. You just got to be very careful. You have to be able to control how many fruit flies are in the area and around. There's a number of food grade sprays you can use, which I try not to do that. We try to use ozone, which we put ozone in the atmosphere, and that pretty much makes fruit flies sick, and usually they die. So the ozone is a better deal because it dissipates into the atmosphere and turns into oxygen after it decays. So very, very harmless. If you breathe ozone, it's not good for you, but what we do is we put it on a timer and put ozone in the winery at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then it's gone by the time we come in at 7 o'clock in the morning. So that is Acetobacter and fruit flies. Yes, fruit flies are more than just an annoyance because they're getting in your wine. They actually can cause major problems. Like I said, we lost about 75 gallons of Frontenac Blanc ice wine because they put their little feet on the seal, and that got right through the seal into the wine, and oh, that killed me. 75 gallons of Frontenac Blanc ice wine was destroyed. Number 5. This one here could be number 1 in many cases. This is over-oxygenation. Micro-oxygenation is actually beneficial for ageable wines because it allows the wine to taste better over the first 5 to 10 years. Whereas over-oxygenation, if you leave the lid off of a tank, or if you leave too much airspace in your carboy, it gets that funny stale taste. If you've ever worked around a winery and you open up the top of a tank, that's what it smells like, and that's what it tastes like, is that musty old fruit smell. And there's a number of ways to prevent that. One of them is potassium metabisulfite actually is an oxygen scavenger. Not only does it control bacteria really well, but it also helps keep oxygen from harming your wine. So keep your sulfur dioxide levels high enough, and it varies how high you need it based on what your pH is. So you have to have a little chart. pH is here, so this is where I want my sulfur dioxide levels. And of course you get sulfur dioxide by adding potassium metabisulfite. So that helps, but it doesn't completely defend against oxygen. The other thing you got to do is, like in a carboy, you only want a little headspace. You don't want the surface of the wine, once it's done fermenting, to be all the way around the entire carboy. You want to fill that up or somehow get it so that the wine level goes up into the neck. Then you can store it for years. But yeah, you have that big surface area, and within a month or two, you have oxygenated wine. It's it's very interesting to me. A lot of these home winemakers don't even know oxygenation is a problem, and they want me to taste their wine, and I tasted it, and it's like, geez, this is pretty good, Joe, except for you got a lot of oxygen in there, and I can taste it. And unfortunately, they get all dejected. Joe isn't a real person. I use that name fictitiously. So for all you Joes out there, I'm not talking about you. Anyway, I like to help out by making sure everybody knows that oxygen is probably, for a lot of people, the biggest problem. Number 4. Oh, this is a good one. Number 4, re-fermentation in the bottle. Anybody who's had that is just sick. You go through all this work, you ferment this wine, you filter it, you get it exactly where you want it, you bottle it, and a month later you got corks popping off because it's re-fermenting, and you taste it and it's like, oh my gosh, it tastes funny. Well, it tastes like yeast because now the yeast is live again in there, and it's not getting enough oxygen to be healthy, so it's giving you these funny flavors. And it's not harmful. I mean, you could still drink it, but it definitely ruins your beautiful wine that you worked so hard on. So what can you do about this? This is a major issue for a lot of people. Actually, it's a major issue for a lot of wineries, and there's a number of things you can do about it. Sterile filtering is good, but it's very unlikely that you're ever going to get something completely sterile filtered. So you can sterile filter, and some bottles will last and some won't. Or another one is you can refrigerate. If you refrigerate your bottles of wine, it's not a problem because they're going to stay. Yeast don't grow well in 35-degree temperatures. It takes a year for any yeast to develop any kind of bad flavor if they're that cold. So refrigeration, sterile filtration, okay, but the one that I like the most is you put just 100 ppm of potassium sorbate in there, and you combine that with sterile filtration. 100 ppm of potassium sorbate is almost undetectable even by the people with the super sniffers, the majorly sensitive palates. 100 ppm, if you're going to have a low alcohol wine, it's not going to protect you. If your alcohol is around 9 or 10%, 100 ppm isn't enough. But for your 13, 14% red wine that has a little sweetness to it, 100 ppm is all you need. I'd say if you're at 12, you probably want to go 150 ppm. So potassium sorbate along with sterile filtration, it doesn't prevent fermentation, but it doesn't allow the yeast to multiply into big enough numbers to do you any harm. So that is one of the main things that you can do. That's what I do. Big wineries actually have a process that injects a certain yeast killer into the bottle as it's bottling, and it's gone like 60 seconds later, but it kills everything in the bottle. And that would be the cat's meow. That would be something that I would put in if I could afford it. But at this point, we can't afford it. All right, so re-fermentation, that is one that, it's very frustrating. You just got to be clean. Sterilization, I could talk to you about that for hours and hours too. Suffice it to say that for most of us, hot water above somewhere between 180 and 140 degrees, that range is enough to kill any kind of anything. So you get it above 180 and you're 100% sure that there's nothing in there like a bottle or a bottling line or any kind of equipment. There's nothing in there that can live, and you're going to have a clean environment for that wine to go into, or such as hoses for that wine to go through. So that is the number one method to prevent re-fermentation is sanitation and then treatment of the wine to make sure that the wine itself is not ready to re-ferment. This is a nightmare one that we're going through right now, and that's press failure during harvest season. Press failure, to make a long story short, our press got a hole in the bladder last harvest in 2020, and we ordered a new bladder, and they sent us the wrong one, even though they kept insisting it was the right one. So we've been struggling the entire season to try to keep our press working, and we've taken it apart about 6 times now and put it back together. And some of the presses were losing 15 or 20% of our potential wine, and some presses were getting the full amount out of. So So suffice it to say, press failure is a major concern for winemakers. Now, for you guys with the small presses, the 20-pound, 100-pound, 50-pound presses, those, they're a little less, there isn't so many things that can fail on those. We have a 20-pound press here, and we still keep it in the winery. It's the first press I ever used as an amateur winemaker. And we have a 400-pound press here too, but the 400-pound press would take almost 3 presses. No, I'm sorry, it would take 5 presses for every 1 press of the 1 ton we have. So yeah, those little presses work, and they're nice for a backup, but it's gonna be a long day. All right, let's go to number 2 biggest worry for a winemaker is that you have everything hooked up, you're transferring wine, it's gonna be about an hour or half hour to an hour to transfer, so you get focused on some other event in the winery, and you turn around and one of your valves or fittings failed or a hose failed, and now you just dump 1,000 gallons of wine down the drain. That, I know a lot of people that actually happened to, and it is heartbreaking. I mean, So what is the cure for that? That one's simple. Don't ever take your eyes off of that wine, especially if it's one of your really important wines. Man, that stuff can happen in a heartbeat. Has it ever happened here? That particular thing hasn't, but what has happened is a hose flew out of the tank, and this was when we were doing must. So we got the hose sitting in the tank and it wasn't tied down well enough, and the hose flies up in the air and starts spewing must all over the winery. This is the one you've all been waiting for, excessive H2S, hydrogen sulfide. You've probably had this happen. There's 2 ways this can happen. One is your yeast does not have enough nitrogen to keep it to feed on so that it can stay healthy and keep producing alcohol until the sugar's all gone. That happens, the yeast gets sick and it starts producing hydrogen sulfide. That, to me, is less common than the low oxygen. We've had problems with not enough oxygen in the wine because we are very sensitive to oxygen from the very beginning based on other forewarnings that these are our biggest problems, just like I'm warning you. But so if you're too careful about getting oxygen in the must, it starts fermenting and you're good for 3/4 way through. You press it and it smells great. You put it in a tank and 3 days later, it's like the worst smelling wine you've ever smelt in your life. It's like opening up a can of rotten eggs. It's that bad. And that happens because the yeast didn't have enough oxygen, and the same thing as if it doesn't have nitrogen when it's in the big part of the fermentation process. If it don't have enough oxygen toward the end, it gets sick and it starts producing these foul smelling byproducts. And if you just have a little bit of it, there is a cure. If you have a lot of it, there is no cure, and even diluting doesn't work. So if you have a little bit of it, what you do is these are micro amounts. You're adding copper sulfate in, it's actually an extremely small amount of copper sulfate that'll actually cure that. But there's a limit. For a winery, there's a limit how much copper sulfate we can put in a wine because it is a poison. And what they want is they want you to put your copper sulfate in there and it all gets used up, destroying that hydrogen sulfide. And therefore, there's basically nothing left of it after it neutralizes the hydrogen sulfide. And we've had that problem a few times in a few years. And you just put this minuscule amount in there. I mean, we're talking a few milliliters sometimes into a large tank, and you stir it up and the smell goes away and you're done. You know, it's such a relief when that happens. So hydrogen sulfide, that's a big problem for if you don't pay attention to the health of your yeast. A really, really good thing you can do after fermentation to help prevent hydrogen sulfide is filter. If If it's basically done with fermentation and you filter, you get all of that, that sediment out. As that yeast is still feeding on that sediment because there's still enough sugar in the sediment to keep some of this yeast alive. And if it's not getting enough oxygen, it's producing hydrogen sulfide. So you filter that out, and then the yeast has less to feed on. You don't have to sterile filter, but you want to get that sediment out. And racking is another way to do that. And for me, some of our more susceptible reds, we rack, we press them, and then we rack within a week. With 2, 3, 4 days, we're racking into another tank. With this all being said, I will put this whole list, I'll put it on the blog on our website instead, because that makes it accessible anytime you want it, anytime, anywhere you want it. You just go to coldcountrywines.com, blog, and or news, it says news, and you look up and you'll see the title is 10 Biggest Fears of a Winemaker. And that'll give you some hints on maybe what you want to look for. If you've never made wine before, you can look for it and get some ideas on which way you want to go to try to avoid some of these problems. But more likely, you are a winemaker who's been doing it for a little while and had some of these problems and didn't know what to do. So coldcountrywines.com/news, and you'll be able to look this up. Okay, and remember, if you like these videos and you feel you're getting value out of them, please push the subscribe button down below. And if you want to be notified, you can push the notification button. Also, it'll tell you in your YouTube channel notifications that we put a new video out. And I plan on putting out between 1 and 3 a week. It's harvest season's wrapping up right now, so now I can focus on the things I love doing with you guys, and I will keep on putting out as much content as I can. I like comments on what you guys want to hear. I answer every comment I can. I don't always get to them immediately, but I try to get to every comment I possibly can for winemaking and events, things like that. So please leave your comments, let me know what you think, and let me know what you would like in your next videos. I'm Jay Stager, Cold Country Vines and Wines. I'll see you next time.